we cannot any longer be blind about the admin team and run a successful business.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast, where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? I'm Steve Jensen, a dated dental nerd, and your host.
Welcome, everyone. I am super excited for today's episode. We're doing something a little different today. Today, we are going to talk about embezzlement, which some of you right out of the gates might think, well, I don't have a problem with this. I'm never going to have a problem with this, but you are definitely going to want to listen today. It's one of those things where you just think it's never going to happen to you. I think everyone thinks it's never going to happen to them. And then it does. So today we're going to end up jumping into what are some of those signs we might want to watch for? What are some tools we can put in place so that we can almost guarantee it will never happen to us? And before we jump in though, and introduce our guests, I just want to make sure I do this every week. I want to give a big shout out to the marketing team at Dental Intelligence for sponsoring this podcast week after week. So financially grateful for that. I'm grateful for all the work they do on the back end. If you guys don't know, producing a podcast is a lot of work. And I'm grateful for all the work that they do. Now, in return for sponsorship, there is always a demo offering that they have. So if you haven't checked out Dental Intel for a while, or if you've never checked out Dental Intelligence, then they're going to give you a $50 gift card just for checking out the software. There's some cool new things like insurance claims processing. There is insurance verification. There are automated payment requests that can go out that write back to the ledger, of automated forms and consents that go out that write back. There's so many cool things that they're doing. So if you haven't checked it out for a while, definitely more than just an analytics company where most folks know them for that. So definitely check it out. Okay, without any further ado, I want to welcome Marissa and Chris to the podcast. Welcome, guys. They started a company called the Dental Practice Management Agency back in 2020. Now they're not new to dentistry, just so everyone knows. They have been they've got a combined 50 years of experience in dental, so they have seen it all, probably, it seems like. And they are big power users of dental intel. So I love these guys. I've known them for a long time now, and I'm super excited for them to bring their expertise onto the podcast. It's actually my second time bringing you guys on, so I'm super excited to chat, hear what's new in your world, and then jump in and share some nuggets of knowledge with our listeners. So welcome. How are both of you guys doing?
Excellent. Very good. Very good.
What's new in your world? We're going to talk embezzlement. So I'll just say this to the listeners. And maybe you guys can share the story about how you got to this point. But they just beginning of this year, they started a course about cleaning up blind spots and embezzlement and how you might find some of this stuff. So maybe we start there, because you guys obviously in general are doing practice management consulting. It's not like you're embezzlement coaches. That's not necessarily a thing, but just by being in that space, you end up, having stories and finding some of that stuff. So tell me a little bit about what led up to starting that course, because I think it's an interesting story. And then let's talk about some of the common things to look for.
It's a very interesting story, Stephen. So we've been consulting and coaching with dental teams for a very long time, and we rely very heavily on dental intel for all our KPIs, right? Our key performance indicators for practices, and we bring them in and we share them with the whole team. Well, one of those performance indicators is accounts receivable. So we talk about collections and the percentage collections to production and things like that. And there are a handful of our teams that are they're beautiful. I mean, they're just the buckets are perfect. What's current should be 80% and everything else. And then what's over 90 should be under 5%. So we're
bar
just
charts get increasingly small.
Yes,
the
exactly.
longer the accounts receivable days. Yeah, exactly like you want it.
Meetings, and we're one in particular was last January, January of 2023. Time after, and we've been with that office for a very long time, which isn't our norm, but she needed us for different things. So 2023 January, we're going, this is beautiful. And all along for years, this is beautiful. Great job. Hurrah, hurrah, done. Well, I don't even remember what tipped her off, but she's something in here doesn't look quite right. Mm-hmm. So she dove into the write-offs in dental intel. And wow. So that was a snowball heading down a huge mountain, because as she kept digging, this perfect AR wasn't perfect because they were doing the right things. This
Mm.
perfect AR, yeah, we just dug and
They
not to
were
swear, but
they were
holy crap.
gaming it then. They were gaming it then. So it
Yes.
looked like all of the money was coming into the business in like a really nice, clean way, but they were actually writing off a bunch of the stuff
Writing
Go
off and
ahead, Ruth.
taking. Yeah.
and taking.
So
That's what I mean.
yeah.
Like in the ledger, they were just writing it off and then pocketing money.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I think, I was a regional manager long before I was ever a consultant for 23 locations for a large
Yeah.
DSO. And the one thing that I found a lot of was embezzlement. There's a lot of people, right? There's a lot of hands in the pot. So I kind of always look for things, I kind of have trained myself to look for red flags. This year, since this one, have been over and over surprised, just new heights or lows, I guess, that people will go to do these things. But this one particularly opened my eyes to a whole different way to embezzle. And people don't necessarily consider it embezzling, but we, after finding this one, went on a witch hunt and we found a lot of witches because we realized that it's not just taking dollars, it's what we have coined Robin Hood embezzlement, right? Like I'm taken from this rich doctor and I'm given to this poor little patient that I love so much. I'm going to write it off to insurance because insurance, it's kind of like when we blame stuff on the lab when it doesn't get there. Oh, the lab didn't get it to us. It's the same thing. It's so easy to vilify insurances because they're the big bad guys. But the reality of it is that, like you said earlier, this is a blind spot. I realized, and Chris and I had a very sobering moment as consultants, to be very honest with you, because we have been praising this human for this amazing AR for more than a year. And what we realized in one look at the write-offs in Dental Intel, because it cleans it up so easily, is that, oh my gosh, and she was also stealing money. It wasn't just the embezzlement of that.
Was just like holding their breath every time you had a conversation around AR. Like I can just imagine one that's like pocketing money. You're just like, holy crap. Like people that are pocketing money probably don't want dental intel in the practice. They're the ones that are like, this thing's broken. No one will look at it.
No. They don't want dental intel and they don't want consultants, right? I mean, like those are the people that were always like
people poking around in their business. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So we had a sobering moment, like I said, and then we did start digging. And one of the things that Marissa does say, and I say as well, but she really does back this, is that it's surprising to us that dentistry is one of the few businesses where the business owner does not understand how to reconcile their accounts. What's coming in, what's going out, how do I bill? How do I put it on the ledger? How do I balance everything? They rely on other humans that they don't know well, but have 100, we hear this all the time. I have 100% trust and confidence in fill in the blank name. And this is, and they have, if that person left, they wouldn't know how to process an insurance claim or take a payment over the counter, or even run their credit card, through. They take their deposit to the bank, and that's it.
So tell me, I want to make sure listeners can hear this. The common places where you would look, because in terms of money flow in the dental practice, it's complicated. And at the same time, it's also in some ways simple, meaning we're going to complete treatment. We're going to collect some of that money from a patient, and we're going to collect some of that money from insurance. And those are our two sources. And then where it gets complicated is sometimes insurance doesn't pay as much. So do we have a business practice of writing that off? If we do, that can create risk where someone could start to do some funny business where it's well, no, doctor is used to seeing some write-offs from insurance, so I can just take some cream off the top or whatever have you, or do we not write off those portions and we collect from patients? And then in that situation, it can also create a situation where, if I'm thinking through this right, and maybe I should have you guys be the ones do the talking, someone could also say, hey, doctor thought we were going to collect all this from the insurance, and I could just write it off, but then actually collect the remaining amount from the patient and pocket that as well. So I could see how you could get into funny business. Is there anything you want to highlight? So I want to talk about identifying it, if it is an issue, where some of those places you might look, but then I also want to do the conversation, move it into a place where maybe it's productive, where it's like, hey, like, what are some like risk avoidant things we could put in place that might reduce the risk of because really, I think most of these people that are embezzling, I have kind of this base assumption they're probably good people that are deciding, like making a bad decision, whether it's like a hardship in their life, or maybe like the doctor had a series of like things that the doctor did that frustrated the person, where they're like, like I don't make as much as I should, and I shouldn't have to deal with this. And then they kind of justify their way into it, which we all do in some way, shape, or form, probably at some point in our life with some bad decisions we make. But I assume they're probably like good people. So what are some things we could put in place so that we could like avoid having team members make that bad call? Does that make sense? So let's start with like any other things. How do we identify it? What might we look for to like do an audit? And then let's talk like, what are some ways we can help our team members avoid that decision potentially, maybe?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're asking that, because to be honest with you, when I sat down after Chris and I were devastated at the end of last year, I was like, we have to make a change, because this is happened under our own watchful eye.
Yeah.
And if that's happening with us, what could be happening? And, there's all kinds of things that we've uncovered. Yes, the Robinhood embezzlement that we were talking about. I've had people collect.
Oh, hey, which that one I want to make sure is super clear. What she was saying there with Robinhood embezzlement is that that they might just like write off that portion that the patient owes, but just never tell anybody, right? So they're not taking, no money is actually going into that employee's bank account, but they're letting a patient get away with not paying the business, when in reality they should be paying the business, right?
Correct.
Absolutely. 100%. And I've
100%.
had people in our CE be like, oh, well, that's not really stealing. But if you, Stephen, walked into this meeting and set $1,000 on the table and we were all in person, and you went to the bathroom and I grabbed your $1,000 and burnt it in the trash can, did I take your $1,000?
Yes.
Can you have it any longer? No, and you worked hard for that $1,000. So to me, that's stealing, right? It's just like being on the clock and not working, so same kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely. So that's Robinhood embezzlement. And then, I've had people, refund their own credit cards instead of patients when they're working credit lists. I've had people fraudulently bill insurance under their friends that weren't even patients of the practice. And the patient, which was their friend, got the payment from insurance. You name it. We have seen it's bananas.
I would have never even thought about that. Oh my God.
You and us both. What's happening in the world?
That's crazy.
I think, the biggest thing is that when we really sat down and I was like, Chris, we got to do something. We got to educate people. We got to find rooftops to scream it from. I didn't want to do what I felt like everybody else was doing, which was painting this like lurky picture of that admin person that was waiting to steal from you. I wanted to make you realize we have caught people's aunts, people's business partners, you name it. We have caught it, brothers. Like this is the person that you trust, the person who you went to their kid's bat mitzvah, right? Like these are those people. And so they do trust them and they don't know any better. And so what I wanted us to focus on, which is exactly what you just said, not what and how you can do it, but how can you protect yourself and your business?
Yeah, cool.
And that's what we do the entire 2-hour CE is. Yes, I talk a little bit about how you can do it and how you could skill, just so people honestly get a little bit scared. I need them to get scared to realize this can happen to you. If you tell people 1 in 3 people get cancer, what does everybody think? The 3 of us think, ooh, I hope
it's one of us.
I feel bad for one of you other people, because it's not going to be me. So it's got to be you two. I'll be thinking of you. That's what people think. It's not me. I always think that, but 85% of dental practices get embezzled from. 85% nationwide. Wow. So it's scary and it's happening. So I think the reason why we talk about it in the beginning when we do our CE is just to make people aware that this is happening. And then the other part is, what can you do? We created an entire audit system so that docs once a month, once a week can look at different things. If you have dental intel, honestly, and no, people out there, we are not being paid by dental intel to say this. We preach this also, is that you have to have this because it's just so much clearer. But number one, you need to know how to read an explanation of benefits from insurance, which is something that we're teaching all of our doctors in this class. You should be pulling 10 of those a month so that you can look at, and different insurances, pull some cash patients in there, because people that aren't in network with insurance always tell me, oh, I'm not going to have write-offs because, we're fee for service. Awesome. Your admin team has bleeding hearts. We all do. And we cannot believe that you're charging that cash patient full fee for that crown doctor. How could you dare do that when you're writing off so much for Delta? So we might just sweeten the pot for them slowly and give them a discount. And if you're not looking at those discounts weekly, monthly, that you're practice is giving out and making sure that you've approved them, that might be a really big blind spot for you. Also, what are you looking at the end of the day? Are you looking at day sheets and making sure that everything's correct? And are you getting a claims reconciliation report so that your electronic claims that went out, you can see the patient's names? That's important. That's how that doctor that had the fraudulent claims where the friend was doing the insurance ring.
Wait a second. I've never done work on this named person before.
Who is this person?
We don't even do implants, so like that would have been, which is exactly what happened. They billed for an implant, the doctor doesn't even place them. So those are the things that we can catch when we're running those reports. And most of our doctors, when I start asking, say, I don't have a report that I really look. Yeah, my admin or office manager gives me those reports, and like we keep them in like a folder or whatever. And I never look at them. I don't even know how long I'm supposed to keep them. I'm like, you got to make sure that reconciles, and make sure that your bank account reconciles with what went into the software that day, and that your EFTs, if you choose to use them, are constantly going in always. They're not piling up. We've seen it all. And I think the biggest thing that scares me is that the dentists out there are business owners, and they're small business owners. And this, when it happens to people, and I do mean when, because it's 85%, right? We watch them be devastated. The $100, $200, $300,000 can mean them keeping their doors open sometimes, depending on where they're in the life cycle of their business. So for us, it's just, gone are the days where you can trust Susie at the front office is doing all the right things. You need to know what's going on in your practice and create clarity around that.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is you named off a few things. So I think it's important as a business owner to start thinking about like risk management, risk mitigation. And so a few things that you mentioned are like, hey, if everyone on the team knows that there's like a monthly audit happening of like, I think like, how do you let your team members know that? Do you just like review it with them, or is that like part of like performance management? Because that's good. I like that idea. Like, hey, there's a monthly audit. So like on our expense reports, right? Like we know that there's like a couple eyes from finance that are looking at like what we're spending money on when we're traveling, and it just keeps you, when you're going to go swipe that company credit card, it keeps you from like adding on things where you're like, yeah, I probably shouldn't expense at a company. So like having some accountability measures there is good, where if like team members know, hey, this is getting audited once a month, then that's going to dramatically reduce the risk of someone trying to, do some funny business, because they know that there's eyes on it. Does that make sense? Like, so who do you implement that with? You do like a performance review. So like with whoever's managing insurance claims, you just kind of doing a little check with them once a month type of a thing.
I bring in all of admin. So first, I always tell the doctors when they're in our CE, because a lot of these doctors aren't our clients, So I'll tell them, I want you to go back to your practice. I give them an audit checklist, kind of time of when they should be doing what. Because there's some stuff I want them to look at weekly, like their write-offs. They can pull that up weekly, especially if they have dental intel. Just make sure there's no funny business. It's really quick, And then the EOB pull is about, and cash patient pull is about, once a month. But I want them to do that for a couple of months before they say any words to any humans in their practice. We're building a case or not, right? So I don't want you to really be like, oh my God, I can't trust anyone. But also you don't know who you can trust. So we want to make sure we're trusting but verifying, and do that for a couple of months. And then you'll start to notice, okay, I noticed that every time, we bill out a pro fee, that Jessica up front is writing it off if the patient owes. That's not a protocol in our practice. Why is that? Are they coming more often and we're not, we don't have a rules around it, and we didn't do a treatment plan, whatever it is. But then once I have a lot of these things where I can actually go back, it's an entire admin moment. I'm not going to go just to my office manager, because I've had people do that before. And guess what the office manager was doing? She was stealing with another admin person. So she covered up everything as soon as she knew. So it needs to be a moment where you're building, you're figuring out what's going on, and then going back to the team. And then, after those first 2 months, the third month is figuring out, having a conversation, letting them know, guys, I'm getting a better view on my business. I want to take it by the reins. I'm going to start having these conversations with you just so that we are all on the same page and I know what's going on. I want some clarity around what's going on up front.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm even just thinking like if the team knows, hey, there's like a policy around write-offs that the doctor owner is implementing, then that just like alerts them, oh, doctor pays attention to what happens with write-offs, you know what I mean? Or adjustments.
Yeah.
Where a lot of times, I agree with you. Like most of the time, I think I would, yeah, for sure, I would say most of the time, majority of the times, adjustments and write-offs is like this like black mystery box for most owners. Like they just are pretty unaware of what's happening there, and oftentimes are surprised just by a review of it. Like if they just go, like you said, like just go scroll through the last month and kind of look at what was written off, they're like, oh wait, what? You know, like that was a high school buddy that I gave a sweetheart deal once, and now my team's just writing that off
all the
in
time.
perpetuity.
All
You
the time.
know?
And Stephen, we do want to say that it isn't like that 85% isn't, like you said, criminals. They're basically
Yeah.
good humans. And oftentimes we see that it was Lisa was leaving and she trained Janet, and now Janet's leaving and she trained Michelle. And so Michelle only knows what she was taught by Lisa and Janet. So she just keeps not charging out that third pro fee a year to the patient that isn't covered by insurance because Lisa and Janet all told her to write it off. And so she does without question. So a lot of times it's just that telephone game of training, that happens that just needs to be cleaned up. So
Cool.
Yep,
Well,
that's very true.
any wrap-up thoughts around this? I think it's a very relevant topic. I think it's something that if I were a practice owner, I would definitely pay attention to. And, and especially like maybe I shouldn't like I don't want to like cause like more doubt in the team. So this one's like a little bit of a struggle for me. Like I want there to be trust. And I think so many books you can read suggest that there needs to be a level of trust, but you also just have to realize that like you just do some self-reflection and it's like, yeah, like I'm a good person and I've made justified some poor decisions. And I think that is, if I do that, then it's likely that people are going to do some of that in my business. And so the more I can put some systems in place, some rules in place that help mitigate that, the safer environment I create for my team so that we can all trust each other and make sure that things don't go south unnoticed, which I really like. Well, any other like comments, advice you want to give here at the end? Obviously, I would definitely encourage folks to check out your CE course. So you can go to these guys' website. It's dentalpracticemanagementagency.com. And is the CE course online, or is this something that you guys are just like traveling the country and look for it in an area near you, kind of a situation?
Both. We're traveling the country and doing webinars. So we definitely have had calling to do another webinar. So we'll have it out soon and it'll be on the website when we get it going. But I think final thoughts for me is we cannot any longer be blind about the admin team and run a successful business. Chris and I find dentists at the end of their career all the time that have not looked at their business the way they should. And now they're selling their practice for some like Kmart blue light special price, right? Which for your youngins out there is really cheap. But I want to make sure that people understand like you can have a successful business and not watch these things, and your business will be so much more successful having you understand every piece. I'm not saying you got to bill insurance, but know what's going on. Don't make sure that if Chris can't be here today, then no payments go in and I don't know what I'm doing and no one else does either. It cannot be one person. It has to be a whole team and you watching and verifying.
Yeah, I love that. Chris, any last thoughts before I end with our staple question?
No, I think Marissa, summed it up beautifully, and just that we will get that webinar as soon as we confirm our date for that fourth quarter. We'll make sure that webinar information gets out.
Cool, great.
Onto our website.
Sweet. And then the last question I ask, you've already been asked this once, but I'm going to ask it again. I ask every guest the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? So I would love to hear what's on your heart, what's on your mind today when you think about that question. What does growth in dentistry mean to you, Chris and Marissa?
Ooh. I think growth in dentistry just has to do with the happiness and joy that it brings to the team to serve the patients they need to serve and to serve the business as well. And if you're doing both, then you will be exceptionally successful.
I love that. Marissa?
Oh, growth in dentistry. I think dentistry has kind of taken a turn, and I don't mean for bad. I think it just is, it's different. It's way different from when both of us first started many moons ago. And I feel like there's this camp of holding on to the past, and I feel like there's this camp of pulling forward to the future, so much so that they're not taking the lessons we've learned in the past with it. So I would love to see growth in dentistry really kind of combine what we know and what we're learning new and go forward. And I think it will happen. I feel like we as business owners in dentistry really have to look at things differently and not like we've always looked at them.
Yeah, that is a great response. I love that. Like, there's this concept where there's always these like big pendulum swings, right? There's something that an industry or a group of people will be excited about, and they're like run towards it, and they're like, yeah, like, and there's typically always like some type of falling out. And you can see this in like a lot of things, like the tech industry. There was in the 90s this big like .com boom where it was like, oh, like this is the biggest new thing. And there's typically like some falling out where it's like, like it's good, but like maybe not as great as we thought. And then there's this like crash, and then we come back to this like equilibrium where it's like, okay, there's this new thing, and it's not as great as we thought, but it is really helpful. And now we found this really great balance. And I'm sure, I'm confident in people that will find that type of equilibrium. Yeah. So thank you guys for joining the podcast today. Once again, it's been a gift. What an interesting like topic to talk about. I think it's fascinating. It's something that I've not had on the podcast yet. So I was excited to talk about embezzlement and what to look for, and how we can keep ourselves vigilant in this space. So thank you both for joining today. For all the listeners, thank you for joining week after week. This has been another Growth in Dentistry podcast. I'm your host, Steve Jensen, and fellow data nerd. Keep growing, and we'll talk soon.